Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar discussion video. This one is going to be all about my thoughts on how to better develop Kuvira as well as Baatar Jr. as characters. So this is a series I've been doing the past couple of weeks where I've tackled some of the more underdeveloped characters and given some suggestions on stories that could be told to flesh out key parts of these characters with regards to backstory and so on. So we've done Asami, we've done the Red Lotus members, now we're doing Kuvira and Baatar Jr. with a little bit of Suyin thrown in here as well. So because she's the main character in a way of her book, she's the main villain, I don't think there's any real need to recap her involvement in the book. This is not quite an Asami situation where I kind of felt the need to point out that as much as she is a main character, she's not actually involved in all that much of the action. Here, it's very clear-cut where she is involved. The central core issue of Book 4 happens around her. So what are the problems? What are the things that actually need looking at, need attention, the issues with her character that need development, and stories going forward will help to fix those unresolved kind of points. For me, there's a couple of things with Kuvira. It all sort of links together, but it comes down to, I think, fundamentally, we need to better understand how Kuvira went from being this character who, based on everything that we're told, was adopted by Suyin. So there's a mother-daughter relationship there somewhere between those two, but none of their scenes present that all that well. We are introduced to Kuvira in Book 3, and everything we see about her kind of points to the fact that, okay, nothing seems villainous about her back in Book 3. She saves Korra's father, she's part of the Zaofu, she's the Zaofu guard captain. She wants to help out in the big final battle of Book 3, but, Suyin tells her to kind of, hold station, stay here, we'll do the key, big fights at the end. Okay, that's fine. Where does all of the villainous aspects of her come from in Book 4? Where does I want to take over the entire Earth Kingdom, I want to, take back United Republic and make it Earth Kingdom territory again. I want to get rid of every waterbender, firebender that is in the Earth Kingdom. The re-education camps, using people as slaves, making these ultimately very negative deals with all of these different states of the Earth Kingdom. We get the explanation at the end that the core idea that you can sort of get behind, that connects you emotionally to Kuvira as the character, is that she was abandoned by her parents at a young age, and she never wants anyone going forward to feel that way again. Specifically, I suppose, anyone from her nation. So she tries to fix the issue after Book 3 with the Earth Kingdom in chaos by fixing it herself and trying to maintain so much control that the Earth Kingdom people don't ever feel abandoned. And obviously along the way she makes mistakes, gets lost in the ideal, and of course goes about things in the wrong way. I think once again the problem comes back to the fact that, okay, she was abandoned by her parents, but what about the fact that Suyin took her in? I think this is the thing that is fundamentally missing from her story, is that as much as part of Book 4 is about Kuvira and Suyin having this fight over an issue that happens, I'll get to the issue in a second. So Kuvira leaves, starts the Earth Empire, and seems to, at this point, hate Suyin, and Suyin seems to also hate Kuvira, as well as the rest of the Beifong family hate Kuvira after this event. And it's this case of nothing in the show itself presents any sort of a positive relationship between Kuvira and Suyin, outside of a couple of Book 3 scenes where it's sort of clear that Kuvira is participating in the same activities as Suyin. But it never feels mother-daughter. It never feels that Kuvira has been in any way influenced all that much by Suyin. I think you can roughly tell that Suyin trained Kuvira, in that they have a very similar style, but that kind of Kuvira has taken it to the next level. But beyond that, it feels like there should be an aspect of Kuvira's character where there should have been some doubts about what she was doing, because Suyin was the one who raised her. Yes, she is driven by the fact that her parents abandoned her, and that is a huge thing. But what about the fact that here's this person who took her in, gave her a home? And this is where I suppose this is the Sozin comparison to Kuvira, where the issue with Roku, remember the early arguments in that episode of Avatar 306, the Avatar and the Fire Lord, where it was that Sozin wanted to spread the prosperity of the Fire Nation, which was doing exceptionally well at the time, to the rest of the world. That was his kind of righteous take on the matter, that I should be able to spread our prosperity, even if it is a bit forceful, into the other nations, because it will help them. And Roku opposed this because, no, you are taking over territory that is not from our nation. Why can't you see the issues of this? As much as you want to help, you are causing international incidents. And it's a similar thing with Kuvira, where ultimately she wants to spread the prosperity of Zaofu to the rest of the Earth Empire, to fix a lot of the issues, given that the Earth Kingdom's in chaos, and in the first place wasn't in a great position anyway because of the way the Earth Queen was ruling things. So like I think there's so much potential here. None of it is really, tackled all that well, because the whole Kuvira orphan, sad backstory is presented through Korra like inferring it. Like it's kind of like, okay, she's learned these things from Sue talking to her, and then makes a few connections about like, oh, this is why you did it, and she's the one who tells the audience. It's not Kuvira necessarily telling us this herself. We were never shown that. We were told that, and again, a lot of the case with like the Red Lotus and as well as Kuvira is it's a huge case of please use the mantra of show don't tell, whereas they went then the complete road of telling and not showing in like book 3 and 4. And that's a big example here of what we are not shown, what we are told about is the connection between Kuvira and Sue, but we never see it ever. Like, is there any scene between those two where it feels honestly like there is a connection in any way resembling that this is a kind of mother and adopted daughter type situation? I don't think so. To me, like the reaction of characters like Opal and stuff like that, it feels like there's a connection because like the Beifong family knows Kuvira. She has a prominent role within Zaofu as the captain of the guard. And she basically, from their perspective, took their brother or son away, depending on which character you're talking about. And that feels like the family connection, that Baatar is involved in this, and he was kind of taken away by Kuvira's actions. It doesn't necessarily feel like this is a case of like a character who is borderline a sister or daughter to the characters has done something wrong and has betrayed the family from that position. It feels like Kuvira, for most of the characters, is at fault because of taking Baatar. And it just feels like half of the writers were like going down the road of like, okay, the connection between Sue and Kuvira is meant to be this. This is what adds the emotion, the intensity to their feud. And then half of the writers were like they weren't aware of that fact, that it was written in a previous episode that they are meant to be mother and daughter. It feels like this plot point that is borderline like not used by certain writers in the show, when I feel it's actually really, really important to address the core of the issue. And that when you really break it down, there are a couple of Kuvira and Suyin scenes that we get that I think are meant to be important but don't feel all that great, because it feels like we are meant to have a large amount of backstory like delivered before these scenes have the impact that they're kind of meant to have. And let's get into some of these scenes, the scenes that need to be built upon. So I think the most obvious one is the little bit of backstory that we do get, and that is cutting back to the time when Tenzin and Raiko go to see Suyin and ask her to basically step in as the temporary leader and stabilize the Earth King in the aftermath, the Earth Kingdom in the aftermath of Book 3. Suyin refuses, of course, because we know she doesn't like world leaders. She said that in Book 3, that she herself doesn't like world leaders, so her stepping in this role would be incredibly hypocritical. As much as she comes across as a good leader, look at how successful Zhao Fu is. She doesn't want to in any way be portrayed as a tyrannical ruler stepping in this way, and just for her own reputation feels that, like, no, this is not for me. I don't want to be responsible for this. And I think it's fairly fair to accept that she doesn't step in because she knows that, you know, this is kind of like something that could lead to disaster, and who knows what could happen if she agrees to it. And it's like, okay, they asked, they're maybe disappointed that she didn't, but there was no like expectation that like you had to do this. And I don't think it's an incredible sense of like your Suyin let everyone down. But Kuvira apparently interprets this as like this is Suyin letting everyone down. And she wants Suyin to do this and spread the prosperity of Zhao Fu to the rest of the Earth Empire, because obviously she really believes in the Zhao Fu dream that they should be able to spread this to the rest of the Earth Kingdom. The problem with this scene is, I think, twofold. One, it is used as basically everything in the reason that Kuvira turns, and the reason Kuvira performs basically every bad, negative, evil action after this point, when in reality it doesn't really feel like that big of a disagreement. Like wow, are you really that upset that Suyin didn't want to like take over a whole nation and basically become a tyrannical ruler, like, given her ideals? It kind of feels like this sense of like, wait, Kuvira, do you actually know who you are talking to in this scene? And this is where, like, obviously this is where the two characters differ. As much as Suyin potentially helped to raise Kuvira, the two characters are fundamentally different. But it kind of shows this weird thing from Kuvira where, like, if this is effectively her mother, the main person who raised her, how is she not aware of this key ideal that Suyin has, that she doesn't like world leaders, so why would she want to be one? She more considers herself like the matriarch of this kind of small community. It's a very purposeful thing where it's not meant to be like the whole kind of world, and like you're just meant to like assume all this stuff about Kuvira that we aren't really told to really get to the point here, because this is where the sudden shift is. Of like in Book 3, I don't think a massive amount of this was presented, that like they've had tons of previous arguments in the past. You could maybe read into the whole like Kuvira wants to go with Suyin, but Suyin tells her to stay behind, and as that meaning something. But like that scene is so vague, and it ultimately doesn't really amount to much. That like, is it something we're meant to take as meaning anything? And then for like this key scene that we're talking about here to be just, why didn't you take over the world? I think we should. And Suyin being like, no, this isn't what I want to do. Like, this is the last I want to hear about this. I'm like, okay, look, it's dismissive, but like, where's also the sense from Kuvira of like, yes, I get it. You're constantly meant to keep in mind, once you've watched all of Book 4, that the whole orphan thing of like, she doesn't want anyone to feel abandoned in the same way that she did. But she's arguing with the person who took her in, who took away that like sense of like that, you know, here's someone who took you in after you were abandoned, who saved you to a degree, gave you this opportunity and potentially trained you and taught you all of this stuff. Like, it just feels like there's no sense on Kuvira's side of like, shouldn't she be like a little bit upset about what she feels that she has to do in terms of betraying effectively her family member, and borderline like I think you're meant to see Suyin as basically, I think, being the most important person in Kuvira's life. It feels crazy to say that given what is like ultimately the scenes in the show, but because it's meant to be this mother-daughter relationship and the orphan thing, how can you not say that Suyin is incredibly important to Kuvira? So it just feels like there's so much emotion and context missing from that key scene. And then especially getting into the whole idea of like what we are shown in the aftermath of this is literally what seems to be the final like 10 seconds right as Kuvira and Baatar leave. What I think they need to do is drastically flesh out the lead up into that scene. And what I mean by that is basically cover the ground between Kuvira and Suyin with the world leaders and basically the big initial disagreement, and what Kuvira goes through to eventually get to the point where all these different things happen. She starts a relationship with Baatar. I think the implication is that she wasn't in a relationship with Baatar at the point of that scene, but starts one with Baatar and leaves. That's why they interpret it as like her stealing him away from them. She convinces a lot of wealthy people within the city to kind of side with her and leave the city, including the likes of Varric. She takes a lot of the guards with her as well. How does she do all this? And I suppose, what convinces her to do all of this? Because again, in this meantime, you basically have to have the character go through one of the key shifts to get where she needs to go through, and that is accepting that she is going to betray the person who effectively took her out of the dark moment of her life, which was her parents abandoning her. None of that feels like it's all that important, and because of that, it feels like her relationship with Suyin isn't as meaningful as they potentially take it. And this is where I'm like borderline, like, they've said that, but like, what was the situation growing up with Kuvira? Did she live in basically the same house as the Beifong family? Or what? Because like, Suyin taking her in, does that mean just like into her house or into her city, and she was raised by someone else in Zaofu but was somewhat close to Suyin? Or was it literally that like she is meant to basically be like a, kind of like adopted sister type thing to Opal, to Wei and Wing, Baatar, and so on? That's what I'm really unclear about. Because getting into the Baatar stuff for a second here, like with their relationship, again, this is another thing that needs development. Like, did their relationship start because there was like history between them, because they grew up together, because they're more or less the same age? So when Kuvira came to live with them or in the same city as them, they had connections, and eventually the relationship became much more like intimate and important after all of these big issues happened with the disagreement with Suyin and the decision was made to leave. Or what? Like that's the other factor. And just with regards to their relationship, like, fundamentally, is the basis of their relationship in the fact that Kuvira wanted to hurt Su, so she purposefully chose Baatar to be in a relationship with as she left to hurt Su? Or was there actually a connection between the two of them, and it made sense, and she was more thinking about this, and it made sense for her to take Baatar because like his skills would come in handy, and he would easily, ally himself with her, because if they did know each other, then she would be aware of his issues with his father. And this is the thing with Baatar, where it's clear enough in the show that this is a dynamic that they're going for, but it's never presented massively to the forefront, that there's meant to be this huge issue between Baatar and Baatar Jr. That Baatar Jr. feels like he's in his father's shadow. Look at the initial introduction of the character, where like they walk by, and I think all Su says to introduce Baatar is just like, oh yeah, and there goes by my husband Baatar and our other son Baatar Jr. And she kind of talks about how Baatar Jr. is like the architect of this city and stuff like that, and my other son works with him. He's just like a copy of my husband type thing. And very clearly there's this sense of Baatar wants to prove himself, to step out of his father's shadow, because they share the same name. He's just called Junior in a way, and they have a similar role of like architect, designer, engineer. But Baatar Senior is seen as like a genius borderline. Characters around him like Varric are seen as a genius, but he isn't, so he has to prove himself. Is that what Kuvira latched onto, to have a incredibly driven character who is very capable on her side, or what. And I think it's not presented clear enough in the show what the case is beyond that. Okay, Kuvira cares about him to a degree, I suppose, to be in the relationship with him, and she shows some level of doubt about making the decision to like sacrifice him. But still, the fact that she does almost shows that, does she care? I get that the whole idea of that scene is meant to show that she cares more for her goal than she does her relationship. But what does that really say about the relationship? You know, that said. So in all of this, I think you have to really heavily develop the Baatar Jr. relationship and the Suyin relationship. And I think you should also go far back and I think show us what kind of Korra is talking about. I think to get to the root of Kuvira, you have to show Kuvira as she was when she was abandoned by her parents. And I think you have to show that tragic backstory, to show what she was like before, when it happened, and how, I suppose, being raised by Suyin with the Beifong family sort of changed her, and you know how she eventually, I suppose, made that transition after all the disagreements to being the great uniter, being willing to fight against Suyin and so on. That's where I think all of this comes from. And then once you've shown all of that, you've shown her gathering up all the wealthy people, Baatar, Varric, the other guards that formed the initial, I suppose, core of her Earth Empire army. I think you probably should show the early stages of her taking back the Earth Kingdom and really get across this idea of the question, basically. When she started, did she have good ideas from the get-go, or was she the evil great uniter from the start? Did she, over time, over the course of getting all these states on her side, have to turn into the character that we see at the start of Book 4, where she's basically borderline blackmailing people, she's hiring people to like sabotage supply efforts, also that she forces people to sign her terrible deal. Is that something that kind of she had to become that person to save her nation in her mind and show that journey, because it's not really shown in the show. And you know, along the way show the relationship with Baatar, of course. And I think towards the end, I think also show why and how Bolin gets involved. I think this is important for his character, but also for Kuvira, of like, yeah, why would she like randomly decide to get Bolin involved in this? In that, like, okay, I get it, Bolin's from, his origins are from the Earth Kingdom, so he'd want to help. But did she sort of like convince him by like, we're going out to do, relief effort, basically, do you want in? Or did she see him more as like, okay, you're not doing anything right now, you're a lava bender, that would be amazing to have on my side? Or was it more of a manipulative thing of like, this would hurt Opal if I kind of took Bolin with me as well, all the while I'm betraying the family? Or was it a thing like, oh, if Korra ever comes back, I have one of her team members on my side? You know, what was her angle with Bolin, I suppose, is what I want to know. Like, or was it just a thing of like, did she actually just say like, okay, look, he's actually really, really capable, like he is a lava bender, but he's also really skilled? Or was it the PR stuff from the fact that he's a mover star, that it would look good to have one of her high-ranking people in her army be a previous mover star, and it would look good with the relief effort and that stuff being put in the papers? I'm not really sure. So I think what I highlight here is that, look, I don't hate Kuvira as a character, but I do kind of like the Red Lotus. I think there's so much potential there, but they really didn't do a very good job at adding a lot of depth to her. So it's another case of like, I like the base kind of character of how commanding she is, her leadership qualities, and how powerful she is, but I think the actual emotional depth and like explanation for her actions and motives, that's really where Kuvira falls flat. And I think a lot of it is on the severely underdeveloped relationship with Sue, the relationship with Baatar not really having much of an impact. I don't know what to take from their relationship, as is I suppose the dynamic, in that most of what I get from it is, okay, Baatar really, really cares about her, like really does. So while growing up together, did he have a crush on her, and she used that later on, or what? The relationship to me feels very one-sided from Baatar, and I really don't know Kuvira's involvement with that relationship. Now, what do they do going forward? Because Kuvira's not dead, Baatar's not dead. They both survived the book, which is, apart from Zahir, like the only real villain to do so. So you can still tell their story going forward, and that I assume there will be some sort of a trial where their punishment is decided for what they did. We know that the family is going to, slowly, but they want to try to mend things with Baatar. But Suyin made it fairly clear that, like, she doesn't really feel that way about Kuvira. And that's another one that just makes me feel like, whoa, that was incredibly cold if this character is meant to basically be like an adopted daughter to you. So will part of that development be showing us the actual relationship between Kuvira and Suyin to get to the point where she's more willing to forgive Kuvira and maybe have a more emotional relationship with her like they used to have? And just in general, like, is Kuvira just going to be a character who's just in jail? She's around, but she's in jail just doing whatever. Or will they come up with some more of a unique way to, like, have her do stuff to sort of, like, pay penance, to be forgiven for what she did? She has to, like, use her skills to properly, reunite the Earth Kingdom or something like that. I'm not really sure. That's where obviously the writers, what is the direction for the character after this? And then I suppose the last thing is just, do you try and do anything else with Baatar and Kuvira's relationship? After what she did to him in Kuvira's Gambit, will he be open to that relationship? And did she ever care in the first place? Because we know Baatar is invested, so I think if she showed some sense of being very apologetic for what she did and getting across how much she actually cares about him, I think that relationship could be something that happens again. But the situation that they're in, basically both being on trial, plus the need to just develop so much about their relationship, I'm not really sure about that. So yeah, in summary, the key things that are needed for Kuvira that need to be told are: one, I think you have to tell at least a little bit of showing her origin story, which is her being abandoned by her parents and the early stages of being taken in by Sue. So show if she lived in the house, or was she just living somewhere in Zaofu and, like, Sue would look over her. So it's not quite mother-daughter, but it sort of is kind of like protege type thing, and that's where their relationship is. Or did she live in the house? What was her relationship with Baatar like when they were younger? Or did it just develop leading up to them actually leaving Zaofu? I think probably the lead-in and the aftermath of the scene with the world leaders really heavily needs addressing to explain Kuvira's basically decision to take action that would directly lead to the betrayal of effectively her family, by taking Baatar, taking all these people and betraying Sue. I think also show early stages of her, with the Earth Empire, and is this a point where she has to make all of these transitions as a leader, where she has to make the harsh decisions and become the tyrant that she is, basically become the great uniter, and then a little bit, I suppose, afterwards going forward. Whether or not we'll get all of this, I'm not sure. The fact that they did tell us a little bit about her backstory almost makes me believe that they won't come back to it, but there's always some hope. The idea of this series is just like, look, here's the information that we need to make the character more interesting, and I think with Kuvira, it's fairly clear-cut about what they need to do. Heavily address her relationship with Suyin, and also heavily address her relationship with Baatar Jr. And I think that solves most of the problems with the character, because otherwise I think the character is fairly likable and does a good job as being the villain of book 4. It's just there's a lot of stuff missing. Like the book 3 villains, there's a lot that's missing from her character. So that's the video for today. Next week we're going to be tackling Mako in this series, and I think from a slightly different angle of like with Kuvira, the Red Lotus, and Asami. It always felt like the writers just they kind of didn't know what to do with the characters in Asami's case. And I suppose Baatar to a degree, but with the Red Lotus and Kuvira, it just feels like, did you guys really just not feel the need to develop their backstories? Like, what were you doing? With Mako, I think there's a clear sense of the writers kind of like shifted directions with the character for some reason, because of the fan reaction, or because they felt that Mako should be the scapegoat character that everyone makes fun of. So it's going to be a different kind of, I suppose, take on this of like, what could they have done and what do they really need to do going forward with the character. So Mako's going to be next in this series. But yeah, that's been the video today. Let me know what you think in the comments, but thanks for watching this video, and bye.